The thunder of the auctioneer's gavel echoed through the dusty livestock barn like gunshots, each bang sealing another creature's fate. Dozens of weathered faces peered through the haze of afternoon sunlight streaming through cracked windows, their eyes calculating worth in dollars and cents. But 17-year-old Novalee Hartwell wasn't here to buy. She was here to say goodbye. Lot 73, the auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowded space. Bay gelding, 15 hands, formerly raced under the name Thunder's Promise. Current condition, ... He paused, consulting his clipboard with theatrical disappointment. Well, folks, I'm obligated to tell you the truth. This one's what we call hopeless. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd as the horse was led into the ring. Novalee's breath caught in her throat. The magnificent animal that had once been her father's pride and joy now stood before strangers, his ribs showing through a dull coat, his head hanging low with defeat. Thunder's Promise, the horse that had carried her father to 3 county championships before the accident, before the medical bills, before everything fell apart. Starting bid is $50, the auctioneer continued, his tone suggesting. Even that was generous. 54, this broken-down old boy. Good for glue factory, maybe, or dog food, if you're feeling optimistic. Novalee clutched the crumpled $20 bill in her pocket, her entire life savings from cleaning stalls at neighboring farms. It wasn't nearly enough, but she had to try. Her younger brother Carver stood beside her, his small hand gripping hers tightly as tears threatened to spill from his eyes. "Daddy would hate this," Carver whispered, his voice barely audible above the crowd's chatter. "I know," Novalee replied, her voice thick with emotion. But Mama had no choice. Their mother, Delphine, had made the devastating decision 3 months. After their father's funeral, the ranch was drowning in debt. The medical bills from his final months had consumed everything, and Thunder's Promise was the most valuable asset they had left. Even in his current state, someone would buy him, though probably not for the noble purpose he deserved. As the bidding began half-heartedly at $25, Novalee noticed something extraordinary. Despite his obvious physical decline, Thunder's Promise had lifted his head and was scanning the crowd with intelligent dark eyes. Those eyes still bright, despite everything swept across the faces until they found hers. The moment their gazes met, something electric passed between them. The horse's ears pricked forward, and for the briefest instant, Novalee saw a flicker of the magnificent animal he had once been. It was as if he recognized her, remembered the little girl who used to sneak him apples and whisper her secrets into his warm neck during her father's training sessions. 25. Do I hear 30? The auctioneer called out, clearly eager to move on to more profitable lots. Thunder's Promise took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Novalee's face. The handler jerked roughly on his lead rope, but the horse resisted, stretching his neck toward the crowd, toward her. A gentle nicker escaped his throat, a sound she remembered from countless dawn mornings when her father would prepare for races, when their family was whole and their future seemed limitless. $30, came a gruff voice from the back. A man in a stained baseball cap raised his hand, and Novalee's heart sank. She recognized Himbook Henley, who bought horses for meat processing plants. The horse's eyes remained locked on Novalee's, and she saw something that made her chest tighten with desperate hope. Despite everything, the neglect, the hunger, the uncertainty, Thunder's Promise was trying to tell her something. His nostrils flared as he caught her scent across the dusty arena, and his tail swished once, deliberately. He remembered love. 35, called another voice, and Novalee's hopes plummeted further. A woman in expensive riding boots had joined the bidding, probably looking for a cheap project horse to flip after some basic rehabilitation. Either way, Thunder's Promise would be leaving with strangers, and Novelly would lose the last connection to her father's legacy. But the horse had other plans. As the handler tried to position him for better viewing, Thunder's Promise planted his feet and refused to move. His gaze remained fixed on Novelly, and he began to paw the ground, not in agitation, but in the specific pattern her father had taught him years ago. 1 paw, pause, 3 paws, pause. It was their old signal, the one that meant, I'm ready to run. What's gotten into this nag? The handler muttered, giving the lead rope another sharp tug. But Thunder's Promise was 17 hands of stubborn determination, and when a horse that size decides not to cooperate, there's little a human can do about it. Carver tugged on Novelly's sleeve. Nova, look at his eyes. He's trying to tell you something. She saw it too. The intelligence that had made Thunder's Promise legendary on the racing circuit was still there, burning bright despite his physical deterioration. This wasn't just recognition, it was a plea. The horse was asking her to save him, the same way she desperately wished someone could save her family from their mounting troubles. $40, Buck Henley called out impatiently. Let's get this done. I've got a truck to fill. Novelly's hand moved instinctively to her pocket, but $20 wouldn't even enter her into this heartbreaking auction. Around her, she noticed other faces in the crowd, families who looked like they understood hard times, farmers whose weathered hands spoke of their own struggles, children whose eyes held the same desperate hope she felt burning in her chest. An elderly man near the front turned to look at her, his keen eyes noting her obvious distress. This was Percival Whitmore. Though Novelly didn't know his name, a retired veterinarian who attended these auctions not to buy, but to witness what he considered a travesty of human judgment. He had noticed the exchange between the girl and the horse, and his experienced eye saw what others missed. Excuse me, auctioneer, Dr. Whitmore called out, his voice carrying the authority of his 78 years. Might I examine this animal before bidding continues? The auctioneer looked annoyed, but nodded. Make it quick, Doc. We've got 50 more lots to get through. Dr. Whitmore approached Thunder's Promise with the careful movements of someone who had spent 5 decades earning horses' trust. As his gentle hands moved along the horse's neck and legs, his expression grew increasingly intrigued. What he found was an animal suffering from neglect and poor nutrition, but whose bone structure, muscle memory, and most importantly, spirit, remained fundamentally sound. This horse isn't hopeless, he announced, his voice cutting through the barn's ambient noise. He's hungry and sad, but look at those legs, that conformation. This is a thoroughbred with champion bloodlines. 6 months of proper care, and this animal could be competing again. A ripple of interest moved through the crowd, and Novelly watched in horror as more hands began to rise. The price jumped to $60, then $5. Her $20 bill felt like a cruel joke in her pocket, but Thunder's Promise had heard something in Dr. Whitmore's voice: respect, understanding, hope. The horse lifted his head higher and, to everyone's amazement, executed a perfect collected trot in place, demonstrating the training and athleticism that still lived within his neglected frame. $80, someone called out. 90 came. Another voice. Novelly felt tears streaming down her face as she watched her father's beloved horse being fought over by strangers. But then Thunder's Promise did something that would be talked about in that county for years to come. He reared up on his hind legs, not in aggression, but in the magnificent display that had once announced his victories, and trumpeted a call that echoed through the barn like a battle cry. When his front hooves touched down, his eyes found Novalis. Again, and this time, she could swear she saw her father's smile reflected in those dark depths. The barn fell silent after Thunder's promise's dramatic display. Even the most hardened livestock dealers stood transfixed by the sudden transformation of what they had dismissed as a broken-down nag into something approaching magnificence. In that moment of suspended time, Dr. Whitmore made a decision that would change everything. "Young lady," he called to Novalis, his voice gentle but carrying across the hushed space, "would you come here, please?" Novalis felt every eye in the barn turn toward her as she made her way through the crowd, Carver still clinging to her hand. Her face burned with embarrassment. Everyone could see her patched jeans, her worn boots, the obvious signs of her family's financial struggles. But Thunder's promise nickered softly as she approached, and she found courage in his recognition. "What's your name, child?" Dr. Whitmore asked kindly. "Novalis Hartwell, sir. This is my brother Carver." A murmur went through the crowd at the mention of their surname. Everyone in the county knew about Jasper Hartwell's tragic death, the racing legend who had died too young, leaving behind a widow and 2 children with nothing but debts and memories. "Jasper's girl," Dr. Whitmore said, his voice thick with sudden understanding. "I should have recognized those eyes. Your father was one of the finest horsemen I ever knew, and this magnificent animal was his partner." He gestured toward Thunder's promise, who had moved as close to Novalis as his lead rope. "Would allow ... double quote, sir. I ... Novalis' voice cracked. "I only have $20. I know it's not enough, but..." "The bidding stands at $90, the auctioneer interrupted, clearly uncomfortable with the delay. "Do I hear 100? Dr. Whitmore held up his hand. "Before we continue, I'd like to propose something unusual." He turned to address the entire crowd. "This horse isn't just another animal up for auction. He's a piece of local history, a champion who carried our own Jasper Hartwell to victory more times than most of us can count. Look at him now. He's not broken, he's heartbroken. He's mourning his partner, just like this family is." Thunder's promise stretched his neck toward Novalis, and she reached out to touch his muzzle. The contact was electric. Years of separation melted away as the horse pressed his face into her small hands, breathing in her familiar scent. "I propose we give this story the ending it deserves," Dr. Whitmore continued. "I'm prepared to cover whatever amount is needed to ensure this horse goes home with the Hartwell family, where he belongs." The crowd stirred with interest and approval, but Buck Henley stepped forward aggressively. "Now hold on there, Doc. This is an auction, not a charity case. I've got a legitimate business interest here." "And what business is that, exactly, Doctor?" Whitmore's voice carried a sharp edge that silenced the meat buyer, Corinthia May Ashworth. A local horse trainer who had remained quiet until now suddenly spoke up. "I'll add $50 to whatever Dr. Whitmore bids, and I'll throw in 6 months of free training." Her offer surprised everyone, including herself. But watching the connection between the girl and the horse had stirred something in her competitive heart. "Make that 100 from me," called out Fenimore Jackson, who owned the feed store. "Jasper Hartwell bought grain from my daddy and me for 20 years. Never missed a payment, even when times were tough." One by one, other voices joined in. Braddock Mills offered free veterinary supplies for a year. The Henderson twins, Kestrel and Lark, promised to deliver free hay through the winter. Magnolia Beauregard, the local saddlemaker, offered to repair any tack the horse might need. Novalie stood frozen in amazement as her neighbor's people she had always thought were too busy with their own struggles to notice her family's pain came together in an unprecedented display of community support. These weren't wealthy people. They were farmers and tradespeople who understood hardship intimately, but they also understood something more important: the power of keeping dreams alive. "This is highly irregular," the auctioneer protested, but his words were drowned out by the growing chorus of support. Thunder's promise seemed to sense the shift in the crowd's energy. He lifted his head proudly and, for the first time since entering the ring, looked like the champion he had once been. His coat might have been dull and his ribs visible, but his spirit was soaring. "What do you say, Novalie?" Dr. Whitmore asked gently. "Are you ready to take your father's partner home?" Through her tears, Novalie could only nod. But Thunder's promise had his own answer. He reared up once more, his front hooves pawing the air in victory, and let out a triumphant whinny that seemed to shake the very rafters of the old barn. The paperwork took less time than the celebration. Word of the community's unprecedented generosity spread through the auction barn like wildfire, and even hardened cattle buyers found themselves wiping away tears as they watched. Novalie signed the papers that made Thunder's promise officially hers again. Buck Henley left in disgust, muttering about sentimental nonsense. But his departure only lightened the mood further. Dr. Whitmore had quietly arranged for his own horse trailer to transport Thunder's promise to the Hartwell farm, and a small convoy of pickup trucks followed, as neighbors insisted on being part of the homecoming. As they loaded the horse into the trailer, Thunder's promise balked for just a moment, his eyes finding Novalie's face through the crowd. She understood his hesitation to many changes, to many strangers. Too much uncertainty for a heart that had already endured too much loss. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, placing her small hand on his powerful neck. "We're going home. We're going back to Daddy's place." The magic word home seemed to unlock something in the horse's memory. His ears pricked forward, and he walked calmly into the trailer as if he suddenly remembered where he was going. The 20-minute drive to the Hartwell farm was like a funeral procession in reverse somber, with respect for the past, but charged with hope for the future. Carver sat pressed against Novalie in Dr. Whitmore's truck, chattering excitedly about all the things he would show Thunder's promise, all the places they would explore together. But as they turned into the familiar driveway, Novalie felt a stab of anxiety. The farm looked even more run down than she remembered peeling paint on the barn. Weeds overtaking the once pristine paddocks, fence posts that leaned at dangerous angles. What if bringing Thunder's promise home was just another cruel disappointment? What if he looked around and saw only decay where he remembered glory? Delphine Hartwell emerged from the house as the convoy pulled up, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. At 38, she looked older than her years, worn down by grief and financial pressure. She had spent the afternoon scraping together enough money to buy groceries for the week, only to come home and find her front yard full of neighbors and her daughter climbing out of a horse trailer with the animal she had been forced to sell. "Novalie, what in the world?" she began. But her words died as Thunder's promise backed out of the trailer and looked around the familiar landscape. That the change in the horse was immediate and profound. His head came up, his nostrils flared as he breathed in the sense of home, and his eyes brightened with recognition. This was where he had been foaled, where Jasper had trained him, where he had learned to trust humans and discovered his love of running. Every fence post, every tree, every shadow held memories. Thunder's promise looked directly at Delphine, and she gasped. In his eyes, she saw something that made her heart skip a reflection of her late husband's determined spirit, the same fire that had driven Jasper to push harder, dream bigger, never give up, even when the odds were stacked against them. "Oh my God," she whispered, walking slowly toward the horse. "Look at you, you beautiful fool. You remember, don't you?" Thunder's promise lowered his great head and gently nuzzled Delphine's shoulder. The same gesture of comfort he had offered her countless times during Jasper's final illness. It was as if he understood that they were all grieving, all struggling, all trying to find their way forward without the man who had been the center of their worlds. Dr. Whitmore stepped forward with a clipboard. "Mrs. Hartwell, your neighbors have put together quite a support package. Feed, veterinary care, training, equipment, everything Thunder's promise needs to recover his strength and, if he's willing, return to competition." "I can't accept charity," Delphine said automatically, the pride that had sustained her through months of hardship flaring up. "It's not charity," Corinthia May interjected firmly. "It's an investment. This horse has championed bloodlines and a proven track record. With proper care and training, he could be winning races again within a year. And when he does," she smiled, "well, winners' purses have a way of solving financial problems." Novalie watched her mother's face carefully, seeing the war between pride and hope, between the practical voice that had guided their survival and the dream-filled spirit that had first fallen in love with a man who talked to horses like they were family. Thunder's promise made the decision for her. He walked over to the old mounting block near the barn, Jasper's favorite spot for giving riding lessons, stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Novalie with unmistakable invitation. "He wants you to ride him," Carver said, his voice filled with wonder. "I don't have a saddle," Novalie protested. But Thunder's promise whickered softly, the sound they all remembered from the days when he would offer bareback rides to the children after training sessions. "Some things don't require equipment," Dr. Whitmore said gently. "Some things only require trust." With her mother's reluctant nod and the encouraging murmurs of their neighbors, Novalie approached the mounting block with trembling legs. It had been 3 years since she had ridden Thunder's promised, 3 years since her father's accident had changed everything, since their world had shrunk from dreams of championships to the simple struggle of survival. Thunder's promise stood, motionless as she climbed onto the wooden block, his dark eyes patient and understanding. When she swung her leg over his broad back, settling into the familiar curve of his spine, something profound shifted in both of them. The horse's breathing deepened, his muscles relaxed, and for the first time since Jasper's death, he felt complete. For Novalie, it was like coming home to herself. All the months of worry, of watching her mother cry when she thought no one was looking, of trying to be strong for Carver while her own heart was breaking, all of it fell away as Thunder's promise began to walk slowly round the paddock. "Easy, boy," she whispered, though he needed no guidance. His gait was smooth despite his poor condition, his responses to her subtle shifts in weight as precise as if they had never been separated. "We're going to be okay, all of us." The gathered neighbors watched in respectful silence as horse and rider reacquainted themselves with each other. Dr. Whitmore had seen thousands of horses in his long career, but he had never witnessed a more powerful demonstration of the bond between human and animal. It was clear that Thunder's promise had been waiting, not just surviving, but waiting for this moment. As they completed their circuit of the paddock, Delphine felt her resolve crumbling, watching her daughter's face transform from worry to wonder, seeing the proud arch of Thunder's promise's neck as he showed off for his audience. She finally understood what Jasper had always tried to tell her. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. "All right," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "All right, then. If you're all crazy enough to believe in this horse, then I guess we'd better start believing too." The celebration that followed was impromptu but heartfelt. Corinthia May walked the property with Delphine, pointing out what needed immediate attention and what could wait. The Henderson twins began discussing feed schedules and pasture rotation. Fenimore Jackson measured the barn for equipment storage, muttering calculations under his breath, but it was Dr. Whitmore who provided the most crucial insight. After conducting a thorough examination of Thunder's Promise, he pulled Naval aside with news that made her heart race. "This horse is in better condition than I initially thought," he said quietly. "The neglect is mostly superficial, poor nutrition and lack of exercise. His bones are sound, his heart is strong, and his spirit," he gestured toward where Thunder's Promise was accepting apple treats from Carver with regal patience. "Well, you can see his spirit for yourself." "What are you saying, Dr. Whitmore?" "I'm saying that with proper conditioning, Thunder's Promise could be racing again by next spring. Not just local competitions, I mean serious races, the kind your father dreamed of entering." His eyes twinkled with possibility. "The Kentucky Horse Park has a program for restored champions. The purses aren't huge, but the exposure could lead to breeding opportunities, training contracts, all sorts of income streams." Novaly felt dizzy with the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "But I don't know how to train a racehorse. Daddy never taught me the technical stuff, just the basics." "That's where I come in," Corinthia May said, having overheard their conversation. "Your father and I trained together when we were young, before he got too good for small-town competitions." Her smile was wistful. "I owe him a debt I never got to repay. Let me teach you what he would have taught you if he'd had more time." As the sun set over the Hartwell farm, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded everyone of better days, Thunder's Promise stood in his old paddock and surveyed his domain. The fences were crooked, the barn needed paint, and the pastures were overgrown, but this was still home. This was still the place where dreams lived. Novaly leaned against the fence, watching the horse that had become their family's symbol of resilience. Tomorrow would bring challenges, veterinary appointments, training schedules, the daunting task of rebuilding their lives from the ground up. But tonight, for the first time in almost a year, she felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. She felt hope. Thunder's Promise lifted his head and looked directly at her, his dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. In that gaze, she saw not just recognition or affection, but partnership. They were in this together, a girl who had grown up too fast, and a horse who refused to give up. Between them, they would find a way to honor Jasper's memory while building a future worthy of his dreams. "We're going to show them all," she whispered to the evening breeze. "We're going to show them that some things can't be broken, no matter how hard the world tries." 6 months later, the same auction barn that had nearly witnessed Thunder's Promise's final degradation buzzed with a very different kind of energy. The annual Madison County Fair Horse Show was in full swing, and word had spread throughout the racing community about the miraculous resurrection of Jasper, Hartwell's legendary partner. Novaly stood in the competitor's area, her hands steady on Thunder's Promise's lead rope, despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. The horse beside her bore little resemblance to the broken animal that had stood in this same barn half a year ago. His coat gleamed like polished mahogany, His muscles rippled with recovered strength, and his eyes held the intelligent fire that had made him famous throughout the county. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, days when Thunder's promise seemed to remember his grief more clearly than his joy. Nights when Novalee wondered if they were all deluding themselves with impossible dreams. But Corinthia May had been relentless in her training regimen. Dr. Whitmore had monitored every aspect of the horse's health, and the entire community had rallied around what had become known as the miracle horse. More importantly, the Hartwell family had healed alongside their four-legged champion. Delphine had found work managing the books for 3 local farms, her natural head for numbers finally finding proper outlets. Carver had grown 2 inches and gained the confidence that came from being part of something bigger than himself. And Novalee had discovered that she possessed her father's intuitive understanding of horses, that rare gift that couldn't be taught but could be nurtured. "You ready for this, girl?" Corinthia May asked, adjusting Novalee's helmet one final time. "As ready as we'll ever be," Novalee replied, though her voice carried none of the uncertainty that might have been expected from someone entering her first competitive race. The truth was, she and Thunder's Promise had been ready for weeks. Their practice times had been consistently impressive, their partnership seamless, their communication so subtle that observers often couldn't see the cues passing between them. But this race was about more than winning. It was about proving that comeback stories were possible, that hope could triumph over heartbreak. Dr. Whitmore approached with a group of strangers, well-dressed people with keen eyes and expensive equipment. "Novalee, I'd like you to meet some folks from the Kentucky Horse Park. They've been following Thunder's Promise's recovery with great interest." The lead representative, a distinguished woman named Valencia Cross, stepped forward with genuine admiration in her voice. "Miss Hartwell, we've been tracking your horse's progress through Dr. Whitmore's reports. What you and your family have accomplished is nothing short of remarkable." "We've had a lot of help," Novalee said honestly, gesturing toward the crowd of supporters who had gathered to watch the race. "The best champions always do," Valencia replied with a knowing smile. "But they also have something extra quality that can't be purchased or trained. They have heart." She looked at Thunder's Promise, who stood calmly accepting the attention, while keeping one ear tuned to Novalee's breathing. "This horse has heart in abundance." The call came for competitors to take their positions. As Novalee led Thunder's Promise toward the starting line, she caught sight of a familiar figure in the stands. Buck Henley sat in the back row, his expression unreadable as he watched the horse he had once dismissed as worthless prepared to compete against some of the finest animals in the region. But it was another face that made Novalee's heart skip her. Mother stood at the rail, tears streaming down her cheeks, wearing the same expression of fierce pride that used to cross Jasper's features before important races. Beside her, Carver bounced on his toes with excitement, a hand-painted sign reading Thunder's Promise, heart of a champion clutched in his small fists. "This is it, boy," Novalee whispered as she swung into the saddle. "This is what Daddy always dreamed of." Thunder's Promise responded by arching his neck and prancing in place, his powerful haunches coiled with energy. Around them, other horses and riders prepared for the mile-long race. But Novalee felt as if she and her partner existed in their own perfect bubble of focus and determination. The starting gun fired, and 20 horses surged forward in a thunderous display of speed and power. Thunder's Promise settled into 4th place, his stride long and economical, his breathing steady. Novalee could feel the strength contained in his frame, the years of champion bloodlines expressing themselves in perfect Harmony at the half-mile mark, they moved to third. At 3/4, they were running second, gaining steadily on the leader. The crowd's roar grew deafening as they recognized what was happening. The comeback story of the decade was unfolding before their eyes. With a quarter-mile remaining, Novalie leaned forward and whispered the words her father had always used. "Now, boy, now we fly." Thunder's promise exploded with speed that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical. His hooves barely touched the ground as he pulled alongside the leader, then gradually, magnificently, pulled ahead. The finish line rushed toward them, and in the final 50 yards, horse and rider crossed into legend. As they slowed to a canter, then a walk, Novalie felt her father's presence as clearly as if he were riding beside them. Thunder's promise had done more than win a race. He had proven that some bonds transcend death, that some dreams refuse to die, and that sometimes the most broken things become the most beautiful when they're given a chance to heal. The victory celebration lasted until well past midnight, but the real victory was quieter, more personal. It was Delphine Hartwell standing in her kitchen the next morning, looking at a check that would pay off their remaining debts and secure their future. It was Carver sleeping peacefully for the first time in over a year, his dreams filled with horses and possibilities. It was Novalie understanding that her father's greatest gift hadn't been his training expertise, had been his unshakable belief that love could accomplish miracles, and it was Thunder's promise, grazing contentedly in his paddock as the sun rose over the farm he had saved, living proof that sometimes the auctioneer's assessment is wrong. Sometimes the broken can be made whole, and sometimes a horse's eyes locked onto a poor girl's smile can change everything. The girl wasn't poor anymore, not in any way that mattered, and the horse called Hopeless had become hope itself, carrying an entire community's faith on his broad back toward a future that sparkled with infinite possibility.